Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled Karen gets my car towed from my private personal property and then claims she owns my driveway. She forged documents and I expose her spiel. Here is what happened, let's dive right into the video. The first one starts like this. One of the best things about the house that I inherited from my parents was the fact that the community of people in that neighborhood were extremely welcoming. From the moment I moved in, they all made me feel like this is where I belong. The best part was that their kindness lasted even after simply welcoming me into the neighborhood. Whenever I needed anything, multiple people would be willing to help and I wanted to do the same for them. Within a year of moving, I knew everybody on the street. The only exception was the lady who lived in the house at the end of the street. Every community had its black sheep and for us, she was it. Her house was much bigger than all of ours and it had been in her family for longer than anyone else's property. This seemed to make her think that she was far better than any of us. The real reason I never met her was because she avoided speaking to us as she clearly looked down on us. This lady carried all the features required to be classified as a Karen. From entitlement to the blonde hair, she was every manager's worst nightmare. She was not particularly skilled at anything and I've never heard of her keeping a job for longer than 2 months. She survived solely on her huge inheritance and never even attempted to make something of her own. Karen was starkly different from everyone else in the neighborhood who worked hard for what they have, and this made her think that she was better than them. She felt entitled to being treated like a royalty, but she didn't like coming down and meeting any of us, which meant we did not have to tolerate her that often. After listening to the stories from the other residents, I was glad I had not run into her yet, but of course, there's only so long I can avoid an encounter with someone whose personality is as large as hers. Karen frequently parked her car on the street, taking up multiple spots and leaving little room for other residents to park. When asked to move her car or park in a different location, she would refuse, claiming that she had a right to park wherever she wanted due to her family's history in the neighborhood. Even when the noise was within acceptable limits. She would call the police or file a complaint with the homeowners association, causing unnecessary stress and tension for the other residents. When a new family moved in next door to Karen, she immediately complained about their children playing outside and making too much noise. She even went as far as to call Child Protective Services, claiming that the children were being neglected by their parents. Karen claimed ownership over a section of the park that was meant to be a shared space for all residents. She put up signs and barriers preventing other residents from using the space and threatening legal action if anyone tried to challenge her ownership. She despised the sound of children and would often chase away the kids who played on the swings. A lot of parents stopped letting their children play there because they felt it had become unsafe. To make matters even worse, Karen frequently demanded special treatment from local businesses, claiming that she was a long-time resident and deserved better treatment than other customers. She would berate employees and demand discounts, causing many businesses to refuse to serve her. And each time anyone refused to meet her outrageous demands, she would bombard them with horrible reviews. Due to the nature of my work, I didn't have to run into her for over a year after I shifted. I usually take my car in the morning, go to work and come back when the sun sets. My car is parked in my driveway and I ensure that it never blocks the road. Except for the weekends, my presence is fairly unnoticeable. On a Sunday, I came home from running errands to find that my car was missing from the driveway. I was incredibly confused. There was no way I would have parked the car anywhere else, but just to be sure, I decided to look around. After searching around the neighborhood, the car was still missing. Just when I was beginning to panic, the girl who lives next door saw me and ran up to me. I discovered that my car had been towed to a nearby impound lot. She told me she saw the car getting towed, but when she asked them why, they ignored her. Confused and frustrated, I asked around to see if anyone knew what had happened. It didn't make any sense that they towed my car from my own driveway. It was not long before I found out that Karen had called a tow truck and had the car towed away. I was furious. I bought that car after working for years. She had no right to do anything at all to my car. I rushed down to her house immediately and banged on the front door hard enough to shake the entire house. Figuratively speaking. I was forced to wait quite a bit before she finally decided she could not bear with the incessant knocking anymore. She looked extremely annoyed when the door swung open. Her face made it clear that she was outraged about the fact that I dared to speak up to her. When confronted about the car, Karen claimed that the car was parked in a spot that was reserved for her and that she had every right to have it towed. To make matters worse, Karen then claimed that my house actually belonged to her as well. She said she had all the supporting documents to prove that the unoccupied property next to my house, as well as a huge portion of my overall property, belonged to her. She went back into the house and brought documents that showed ownership of the property and demanded that I leave immediately. She even claimed that she was generous enough to have allowed my parents to build their house on part of her property, but she would not be as kind anymore. She wanted me to vacate my own house and quietly hand it over to her. The confidence in her voice and entitlement almost made me falter and question myself. It was true that no one in the neighborhood knew who the property next to me belonged to. Considering Karen's family had been here longest, it felt like that she would know who it belonged to. But then again, I had the documents to my house and I would have known if the house stood on someone else's property. I was almost mad at myself for briefly buying her words. I left immediately and contacted a lawyer as well as the police, and they began to investigate Karen's claims. It did not take long for them to discover that the documents were indeed fake and that Karen had been trying to take over the property illegally. The police arrested Karen and charged her with forgery and fraud. Throughout the legal proceedings, Karen continued to behave in an entitled and aggressive manner, insisting that she had a right to the property and that the other residents were all against her. However, the evidence against her was overwhelming and she was eventually found guilty. Her behavior was extremely counterproductive in the court and ended up angering the judge. In the end, Karen was sentenced to several years in prison. She was forced to pay damages to me for trespassing and falsely getting my car towed. To no one's surprise, I was able to keep my home and my car, and the other residents were relieved that Karen's entitled behavior had finally been put to rest. Getting my car back from the impound lot and explaining the guys who towed it that the car was actually in the right place was certainly a lengthy process, but it was a small price to pay if it meant Karen was not gonna bother the people of the neighborhood anymore. The parks were now easily accessible for all the children and local businesses did not have to suffer anymore. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I am so glad that the entitled Karen finally got what she deserved in the end. If you enjoy these types of stories, then please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much. Either way, the next one is another revenge story. I have been with my soon-to-be ex-husband for 4 years and married for 2. I found out he cheated while I was away with our son with a co-worker. He himself is a corrections officer and she was a nurse at the same facility. I had suspicions about him cheating for a long while and had a gut feeling that he was up to no good while I was away. I know that he cannot take his cell phone into the prison and keeps it in his truck while working. I got an extra key to said truck and I know his password, as he never thought to change it. Well, there was a lot of evidence of his infidelity with the nurse. Not only that, but there was also evidence that she used her Amazon account to buy him cleansing pills and drug test strips to flush his system for a state-mandated test for a promotion he was going for. He is an avid cocaine and MJ drug abuser, not to mention a functioning alcoholic. So I contacted the special investigation officer that oversees correctional officers and brought them the evidence. One night they went into the prison while he was working and searched everything of his, including the truck, and made him take a drug test, and surprisingly he failed. He was then fired and I then contacted the investigations unit of the promotion he was going for and gave them all the evidence and told them he was fired and why. He was disqualified from that promotion. I then contacted the Conduct Review Board for nurses and gave them the evidence that the nurse had knowledge of his drug abuse and helped him flush his system before the state drug test. It is still under review, but she is also presumably in trouble with her job. He is now back at a county job that he hated for significantly less pay. We are also getting a divorce and I hope he is happy with the choices he made, because I sure am in turning him and his mistress in for their misconduct. And yeah, Ripe Stars, talk about pro-revenge. This is pretty much as pro as it gets. If you would have been in that situation as OP, would you have done the same? Or would you have even done more? Let us know in the comments. And because it was so satisfying, we will now read another revenge story. This happened around November 2022. I recently got promoted to be a driver for this small commissary kitchen in my hometown. The job is really easy because I get paid to lounge around after doing deliveries, hopping on YouTube, Reddit, read manga, watch movies, etc. However, I would wake up around 4 AM to start my deliveries. When I started the deliveries, I would always park away from the entrance of the stores I delivered to make space for large 18-wheelers to drop off their stuff. There was this medium-sized box truck that would always block me in my parking spot or park next to me, to the point where if I opened the door, I would have 7 inches of door space to hop in and out. It was very frustrating because he always arrives after me. This continued to happen for the next 5 weeks. So I'd leave a note on the truck windshield saying, "Hey, is it possible for you to park somewhere else? Or move your truck over a bit so I can at least squeeze in." My passenger side door was busted and my company did not want to pay to swap out the vehicle. One day I ran into the driver, let's call him Hugo. Hugo ran up to me with his hands curled into a fist. He got in my face and started cursing me out for leaving the note on his windshield. I told him that it is common courtesy to leave a note instead of being the giant butthole I could have been and gotten his truck ticketed or towed. He did not bat an eye and continued to harass me, calling me a bad driver and I should unalive myself. At this point I did not really care to talk to him, or else it would be adding fuel to the fire he had going. As I was leaving to drop off my deliveries to the store, Hugo hopped into his truck and said that he would have his friends come by and blast me if he ever saw me again. At this point my anxiety shot to the roof. Being threatened by this man over something as small as a note on his windshield made me question a lot of things. With fear in my voice, I told him to bring it on, bring your friends over and blast me in this parking lot. I'll see you tomorrow same time. The next day came and I got to the store a little later than usual. Hugo's truck was parked terribly and blocked in 3 cars. I then parked further away and as I got out of the van, I ran over to take a picture of his license plate and his company truck. I dropped off my delivery and look who appeared. Hugo! I shouted to him, "Hey, where's your friends? I'm still here, ain't I?" Hugo ran his mouth and said, "You got lucky, punk." I was lucky? How was I lucky? Man be talking out of his butt. From this point on we were exchanging very nasty words as he got in his truck. I told him, "Yeah, you will be losing your job soon." He scoffed and said, "Yeah, right. I get paid more than you. I got more money than you. You will never amount to anything more than me." He got out of his truck, looked around for my van, ran over to it and smacked my delivery van with a tire iron. I quickly snapped a picture of him damaging my vehicle and he drove off in his truck like a madman, flipping me off and attempting to spit on me. After my drop-off, I took the time to look up his company with the pictures I took prior. I then called the company and left a voicemail explaining the situation, his truck number, the time he was at the store, all the info I had at my disposal, and I went on my day. 2 hours later I got a call from his company and the person who called was his supervisor, let's call her Vicky. Vicky called to confirm that what I left in the voicemail was true. I told her, yes, this man at this time at the store verbally assaulted me and my vehicle. Why would I lie about this situation, miss? She verified that the person was Hugo. She told me she was in shock because Hugo was her best worker, the nicest man she hired. She was appalled at his behavior towards me. But like I said, why would I lie, miss? He has been doing this for the past 5 weeks and I finally took action with calling you now after gathering the information. Would you like pictures of my damaged vehicle and his face? Vicky said, no, it's okay. I quickly asked her what disciplinary action would be taken from this point on. She said their company has a 1-strike rule and with these circumstances she would write him up and then fire him. She also told me that Hugo was working for this company and was gonna leave in a year or so to join the police academy. She told me that police academies have a very strict acceptance and to join the person would have no prior strikes on their employment. After this write-up, the chances of Hugo joining the police academy would be 0%. At this point, I felt bad that I costed him his job and chances to join the police academy, but in the back of my mind, having someone like that patrolling the streets would be a danger to society instead of protect and serve. Vicky told me to have a great day and I asked her to follow up with my boss with the damages to the vehicle and update me on Hugo's work status. Sadly, she never followed up after weeks. After this incident, I kept going about my drop-offs and I did see the same truck, but there was a different driver. This time, the truck was parked away from other cars and there was a different driver now. I can assume now that Hugo got fired from the company and I'm very happy. Hugo, if you're reading this, re-evaluate your life choices, man. Don't be a police officer, you're a menace to society. And the next one is titled, Move Out of Your House. My wife and I bought a house a couple of years ago. It's decent sized yard and we even have a couple of chickens. This is Los Angeles. We got 3 boys, a 6-year-old twins and a 9-year-old. They are kids, they are loud, not screaming loud though, and they love playing in the yard and playing at the park literally across the street. My next door neighbor complains all the time about the noise level in the yard and at the park. They are this boomer retired couple with kids my age, which is mid-30s. Actually, most of the neighborhood is like that because so few people, especially with kids, can afford a house in that area, so it's a bunch of retired boomer snitches with Ring and security cameras at their front porch. And no, nothing ever happens here. They designated my neighbor as the block cop. The funny thing is that the kids are hardly home, they are in school most of the day and have sporting practices and games on the weekend. I tried to reason with them, but they feel that because they lived in their house for 40 years that we have to follow their rules as their next door neighbors and keep quiet. I got no sympathy for them. These are the people who bought their sizable home for $40,000 in the 80s, and if adjusted for inflation, it's like buying the same house for $125,000 today. However, it's a house in LA, so it's more like $1 million. My wife and I make good money, but our mortgage is astronomical. We are working much harder than our neighbors ever did, and yesterday our neighbor came to our door and complained again about our kids being loud. Not too loud, just loud at the park. Per the other neighbors who lived across the street from said park, then he lectured me about my logic of moving to a quiet area with loud kids. If that was not bad enough, he suggested that my wife and I look at homes by the ocean because you don't have neighbors to the west of you. Houses by the ocean are like millions of dollars. I asked him how would I do that and he said that was not his problem. So I told him that he should move out of their house and move to the ocean where he won't have neighbors. I caught some flack for being rude to an older person, but I don't think I was. And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Do you think that OP is the a-hole or rather a bad parent or not? Personally, I would say that we don't really have enough evidence or information about what is really going on. I mean, if OP's kids are screaming and are being really super loud, then OP is probably the a-hole. However, if it is massively blown out of proportion and his kids are actually behaving well, then he might not be the a-hole in the end, so I'm not sure if there's enough information to really make a judgment. However, I suppose you could attribute a little bit of lack of parenting to OP. Either way, comment number 1 said, you are the a-hole for not parenting your kids. If the entire neighborhood is complaining, it's you, not them. Number 2, it's hard to pass judgment here because who knows how loud your kids are actually being. It also sounds like everyone here is being a dick to each other. Everyone sucks here. Comment number 3, everyone sucks here, your neighbors are being unreasonable, but you also seem to have a big chip on your shoulder about boomers. It's not their fault that house prices went crazy after they bought their house. Oh yeah, Ripe Stars, actually I didn't even notice that OP is constantly saying boomers and actually talking bad about older people. To be honest, nowadays I don't really like the way the term boomers is being used. I mean, sure, there are some old entitled people. However, I wouldn't say that someone who bought their house for cheap in the 80s or whatever is necessarily a bad person or something. And it seems like that's the way OP is painting these people. Also, how can OP judge whether these people worked harder than him or not? I feel like OP himself is making a lot of unnecessary judgments. The next one is titled Neighborly Revenge Done Right. This is a long story, so buckle in. We have a big stretch of lawn that is adjacent to our neighbor's lawn. Their dog often runs around on our property and we never minded it. We also have a dog, but we keep our dog in our yard and out of theirs. We are avid organic gardeners and grow much of our own food and are very careful about what chemicals we use on our property. After having our crop decimated by Japanese beetles several years in a row, we did a bunch of research and last spring decided to spread milky spore on the lawn as a preventative. Research stated it would not be harmful to the environment or animals, and we decided to spread it while our neighbors were out of town so their dog would not run around on it. The next day, our neighbor comes marching into our yard yelling about how we tried to kill their dog and how we are inconsiderate idiots with no regard for our neighbors and are terrible people, etc. Apparently, they came home early and their dog ran onto our lawn, and the neighbor claims he watched his dog eat a clump of grass that had milky spore on it and the dog got sick. He screamed for about 20 minutes before my husband had enough and told him to leave. The next day we get a letter in the mail, typed in all caps, demanding that we give him 48 hours written notice before applying anything to our lawn and that we must have his permission prior to doing so. We informed him that as the land and homeowners we are not obligated to inform him about anything we do to our lawn and much less get his permission, but that we would give him a heads up out of courtesy and that he should make an effort to keep his dog on their side to avoid further issues. We did not hear from him for a while, and then early last fall I was out back planting a few trees on our property. He then came out and told me he did not like the trees. I told him, sorry to hear that, but it is my yard and I do like the trees, so they are staying. All winter, every time he let his dog outside, we would watch out the window, and as he directed his dog over to the trees I had planted so he could pee on them. By summer, both trees were half dead where his dog had been peeing on them, and he told me that he and his wife were going to purchase and plant different trees for us as a replacement and that they would be a better variety. I told him no, and instead I dug the trees out and replanted them a few feet off the property line on our side in a spot where they are not visible to us, but where he has to see them directly out his living room and kitchen windows with the dead sides facing his property. The sides facing our property are now lush and healthy, and the sides facing his property, the sides he encouraged his dog to pee on, are still dead and brown. It tickles me absolutely pink every time I walk past the trees, and I have named them my spite trees. I have no regrets and I'm not sorry. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.